everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of the Scaling Stateside podcast. I'm David Rose. I'm the founder at US Expansion Partners, and our firm helps European and UK tech founders successfully expand in the US market. And one of the things that we spend a lot of time in is helping founders understand a lot of the knowledge gaps that exist for people who are entering the US market for the first time. And one of our missions is education and helping fill those knowledge gaps. And we actually going to start a podcast to help founders better understand all the details and best practices and pitfalls of expanding to the U.S. market. And our first guest is actually my business partner and managing director at USXP in the UK, Matt Oxley. The podcast is actually Matt's idea, so if it fails miserably, it's all on him. But he has a really great founder story. So we really want to help founders learn lessons from founders who've already made the journey. And Matt has a great startup story about a company called Opal. We'll get into in a minute, but we thought he would be a great first guest. So Matt, with that, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about where you are today in the world and your background.
Yeah, of course. Really excited to get going with this. I think, as you said, David, there's an education gap in UK founders, and that was a very kind of kernel for this idea. And I'm also sorry to you because I made you get up really early to do this. So sorry about that.
It is 6:06 a.m. in the East Coast officially, just so you know.
So yeah, I'm Matt. I currently live in the UK, just outside of London. And my story is I spent 10 years in the US. I got back about 2 years ago. And I went on an incredible, I would say, US expansion journey myself. And the real I came back 2 years ago and I was really just overwhelmed by solving and understanding why more UK founders didn't go on the journey that I went on, why the US market is not kind of like number one on their list. And that's kind of what I've been really unpacking and trying to understand for the last 18 months to 2 years. And it wasn't until that myself and David got connected where we felt like we were kind of kindred spirits in that regard, where he with USXP had actually built a exceptional, what I call executable framework for supporting. And I think with my kind of operational and experiencing going through it, we're together we're better. So that's kind of like where we've been. But happy to kind of answer any questions you've got, David.
So want to get to Opal, but before we do that, I want to hear more about your entrepreneurial journey up until that point. But let's start at the very beginning. What was your very first paid job?
I've never had a job. I've never been employed by anyone.
Okay, who was the first company you tricked into paying you to do something?
Well, the first company I formally founded was out of university. And what I did is I patented, and this kind of gives you more, I think, insight into my lifestyle at the time. I patented a cigarette extinguisher.
Actually, here in the US, we say patented.
Well, I mean, this is, again, part of why we're doing the podcast, right? Lost in translation. Speaking English weirdly. We patented a cigarette extinguisher. And that is what I kind of then licensed to a lot of public houses and kind of restaurants and chains. And that was my first foray, and I must have been like 19, into the entrepreneurial world, where it's like, oh, wow, right. Ideas that I conceive, I can actually make money from and do what I want. That was compelling. That was really compelling, because also it was a translation of everything that I've learned at college, university, school, putting into practice. So that was kind of like the exciting time. And I think from that age to maybe 2011 was just a chapter of trying, exploring. And, I started music magazines, music labels, healthcare companies. I tried to overthrow the mayoral election in 2008. I started a number of agencies. I was involved in an IPO when I was 26. It was just this kind of like chapter after chapter of, trying and being an entrepreneur. And I think, I never look back and go, oh, wow, I really screwed that up. I always look back and go, oh, wow, that taught me a lot. Because I do believe that right from one chapter to the next, you're always taking lessons. You're always taking, I think kind of, the scars with you from one to the other. So that was kind of like prior to 2011. I would describe them as like the scrappy learning years, but they were a lot of fun.
And let's kind of dig into Opal. What was the origin story of Opal?
Yeah, the origin story of Opal is myself. I had an agency out of London, and we won a gig at Nike in Portland. And it was on that gig that I actually met the other co-founders of Opal. We were working on this digital project, building and rolling out technology. And I think we both had enough of the agency life where it was very much you're only as good as your last project. And you're kind of having to start BD halfway through the project that you're in. And it was this exhausting roller coaster and cycle. You never really had a break. And this, it just coincided that SaaS technology, so software as a service for the enterprise, was just becoming more and more relevant. So rather than buying like floppy disks and things like that, you're actually kind of buying it through cloud, which was fairly new in like 2009 when we were kind of first kind of conceiving Opal. So what we decided to do was, join together and conceive and build a software company. And we had many iterations in those first kind of couple of years, but the premise stayed strong, which is, technology is advantageous to enterprises, but also collaboration is key. So it's those two kind of, I think, founding premises that kind of got us started.
Now, since you were in the UK when this kind of came together, what was the thought process, or was there a thought process about, hey, I can do this from London and sell into the US market, or hey, as the founder, I need to be in the US market? What was the thought process around that topic?
Yeah, and it wasn't, I mean, the thought process was, we're going to try everything we can and see what sticks. And we're going to do it from two markets, because UK is where I was based and the US was where my business partners were based. And that was the kind of like the thinking. And what we ultimately kind of stumbled upon was a technology solution that was helping marketers plan their content. So this coincided with the World Cup. And what we were able to do was obviously adjust and adapt our technology that we built for that use case. And that was the moment that Opal changed. That was the point that Opal had, oh, crikey, right, we have a market, we're solving a need, and we're first to market with this. And then I think everything changes, because I think we'd taken an element of seed money prior to that from both the UK and the US. And the way that I describe it is I was just pulled to the US. It was that kind of like, that's where the checks were made, that's where the stakeholders were, that's where the budgets were, that's where investment, opportunities were, that's where the talent was. And it really was this pull for me, being in the UK, to now kind of make the move to the US.
Well, that sounds like a really romantic startup story, full of puppy dogs and rainbows. Yeah, of course, the whole way. So tell me about the real story of Matt uprooting his life in London and moving to the US.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of like stories prior to that where what we're trying to do is we're trying to keep Opal running while running agencies, and the kind of the struggle with that and the sacrifices that you're having to make. I mean, I had to sell, some of my favorite items of clothing. I had to sell a leather jacket to get on a plane. There's so many stories with that where it's like I couldn't afford breakfast one morning, so I put my milk in my car to ensure that it was cold. I mean, every entrepreneur's got their kind of like sacrifice story. But that was kind of like prior to me getting on a plane. But getting on a plane, I sold everything I had. It was everything that I had in this little flat in Bermondsey. I sold, and I put it into 2 suitcases. And the key for this is like I managed to convince my girlfriend at the time, who's now luckily my wife, to come on the journey with me. And that is what we did. Is like we uprooted absolutely everything, sold every single thing that we had, and we bet on ourselves. Quite honestly, that's the kind of that was how big it was, and I didn't realize that at the time. It's only with kind of hindsight you're like, oh shit, that was risky. But at the time you're like, yeah, this is cool, right? Okay, we got, we're making momentum in the US, we're selling, and the seeds are starting. Let's go. You get captivated with the journey. And it's not until you kind of, I think, look back a little bit like, oh wow, okay, that was a big ask. That was a big jump. But it's all part of the process and the journey.
What was the most unexpected thing about living in the US in the early days?
I think it's more of a personal thing. It was how difficult it was to find a network of friends. That was a real struggle, and I'm taking it to the human side of it now. That was a real struggle because, luckily in the UK, both myself and my wife are very fortunate to have a close network. People that we love hanging out with, that we get a lot of kind of, value from. And that's removed. That's removed the moment you get on a plane. Family are not close to you anymore. And I found that isolation really tough. And I found that loneliness was quite tough as well, because it's just the two of you. Then, you're putting also that on the pressure of, you've got to make Opal a success as well, was challenging. And you don't want to kind of show weakness. This is kind of like, again, it's like stiff upper lip and like, I got this, nobody worry. But it's like, it was tough. It was really tough.
Yeah. Tell me about the first, you ran this through me the other day. Who are the first 5 customers at Opal? Because it's pretty amazing list of US brands.
Yeah, the first 5 customers were Nike, Beats by Dre, so Apple, Nestle, Starbucks, and one that I'm forgetting.
Well,
Levi's.
Let me ask you that. Levi's, I've heard of them. So, as a startup operator in the US, I've always just been shocked at US brands' willingness to do business with startups with very few questions asked. I can remember our client list at my last venture-backed startup. It was similar, right? It was like Microsoft, Starbucks, those kind of brands. And not once were we ever asked for any kind of due diligence, which is great because sometimes we didn't have any money in the bank.
Yeah.
But never once did someone say, hey, do you have the proper money or financing to do this? It's like, oh, we really like your solution. Let's give it a shot. Was that your experience as well?
Yeah, because I think people looked at the innovation more than they looked at the company, which is what it should be. Because also what was kind of evident was that these professionals were wanting to back innovation. This was also going along in parallel with their professional journey. It's like, we need to find differential. We need to find value. We need to find, the latest technologies to drive efficiency and, differentiation in market. And I think that's kind of, without really knowing it, that's what we had.
Yeah, it's just shocking that these brands, they're always in the U.S. are always looking to get ahead, and they're willing to take risk and always looking for the next best thing, and either that helps their career professionally or personally, or helps their company. And those are the really driving motivations to always try and find new things and do better. So it's really a great opportunity for startups. Is that you think a uniquely American viewpoint of startups and technology?
Yeah, because I think in the UK, I mean, if we're going to compare it to the UK, right, where we run a very similar kind of sales motion in the UK as we did the US. And the US was like, oh yeah, okay, innovation, cool. right, can I be part of that? In the UK, you're going to kind of get computer says no, it's too risky, or right, where's your proof points? And there's a very kind of, you got to prove it out before I can commit kind of mentality. So it was very, very, very different. It was stark, the differences in the kind of, in the perception, but also the appetite to embrace technology and embrace innovation.
And what were the early go-to-market motions for Opal?
I mean, quite honestly, it's like throw everything that you can at the wall and see what sticks. It wasn't kind of scientific or maybe kind of thought through. It was, you're in founder-led sales territory, where you're going out there, you're testing or evolving, you're speaking to people, you're networking, you're seeing what's working. You're not really building a machine at that point. It's a get out there, hustle, talk to people, feed it back. What is working, what is not, lean into what is working, ignore what is not. It's hustle.
So you mentioned earlier that your initial funding came from the UK. I think you also said a little bit in the US, but then you pretty quickly, or maybe not quickly, you did pivot into deep dives with some of the best brands in the US venture capital community to get funded. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so we initially got angel money out of the UK and the US. That was kind of like to get us to the point of, us understanding, right, do we have something? Are we going to go for it? How big is it going to be? So that was a kind of really good kind of, I think, phase for us. But it wasn't until we had the success with those organizations that we were able to kind of go and get, what I call institutional money, because, if you're taking VC, what you're wanting to do to be attractive is to eliminate as much of the risk for them as you can. And I was getting those big profile enterprise brands certainly helped that.
Yeah, and so tell us more details. So who ended up funding Opal at the different stages?
Yeah, so for our A round, that was led by Madrona, that are out of Seattle, one of the biggest VC firms out of Seattle. And then our B round was led by Accel, obviously out of the Bay.
So what were the differences between, because you're based in the Northwest, you're in Portland, you're raised in Seattle, that makes sense. All of a sudden you're going to go to the fabled Sand Hill Road in Palo Alto, where all the top VC firms in the world have an outpost, and you start pitching there. Walk us through that process. How was it different from Madrona versus what I call playing in the majors?
Yeah, the difference to me is, there's the way that you want to raise capital is you want to perform, you want to be able to show results, and then you want to be kind of found out. You want the inbound rather than the other way around. Okay, and that's what we were in essence lucky to have, because we found product market fit early. We had those results and successes early. So therefore, what was happening is we were kind of quite notorious in what we were doing and how we were doing it, because the big brands were kind of utilizing our software. So for me, there wasn't a large degree of kind of pounding Sandhill Road. Of course, we were having conversations. Of course, we're being, making people aware of what we were doing, at what stage, and what that appetite was. But, we were growing at such a pace where what we were doing is we were attracting interest from those, top tier, big name VCs.
And which firm did you end up going with for your B round?
Accel led it.
And why Accel? If you had a bunch of options, I mean, there's a lot of there's like 5,000 venture capital firms in the U.S. So why Accel?
I think Accel, number of reasons. One is they're a major, obviously brand, top tier VC, and I think for us it was the infrastructure that was beneath that as well. So, and as a support network as well. So the introductions, it was the guidance, it was the playbooks, it was like all of those, operational items that they could support you with. It was truly valuable to us, and they've been an exceptional partner.
And what was the timing, Matt? So walk me through from founding to the Accel round and from Madrona round to Accel round. What were the time frames?
There was from founding to B was probably 4 years, and then there was probably 2.5 years between A and B.
Yeah, I always think about entrepreneurial journeys. I think it takes 10 years to build a great brand, and I think so many people from the outside are always like, "Oh, it's an overnight success." But I think if you dig into those overnight successes, they've probably been around, for years and years and years, grinding it out.
But let's dig into that, because I think that's a really interesting conversation, because Opal's been going, dare I say it, what, 12, 13 years now? And we it's not an overnight success. But one of the things I fundamentally believe is it's the kind of missteps that make you great. It's not the kind of, because if you're in an overnight kind of success story, what have you learned? You've gone from 0 to 100 million overnight in 18 months. What lessons have you learned along the way? Probably few. If you've taken longer to get from 0 to 100 mil, you think about all of those decision points. You think about the ones you got right. You think about the ones that you haven't got right. That's where the gold is. That is where the gold is. And I think that's something for, I think, entrepreneurs to kind of step back and just think about. Because what you do is, like, if you make a misstep, you're like, oh shit, the world's ending. Like, oh, I'm a really bad entrepreneur. It's like, reframe it. What have you learned from this? Are you going to make that mistake again? No. So what you're building is this 360 kind of like bulletproof shield of like, all right, go to market, know about it, product market fit, know about it. The way I think about the entrepreneurial journey is every single quarter you're doing a module, and you don't know what that module is until you're halfway through it. So this quarter could be like, oh, finance, got it. Next quarter could be like, go to market, but you won't know that. You won't know that till you're halfway through it. And those modules will never end, because you're going to need topper courses on finance and topper courses on go to market, product market fit, ICP, whatever it may be. But that's the chapter and that's the journey that you're on, which is, always be learning, always be evolving.
Walk us through, from the early days of founder-led sales into scaling a team. How is hiring in the U.S. different? How is managing in the U.S. different? How is U.S. business culture different from your previous experiences?
Yeah. So I think, the baton change from founder-led sales to building and scaling a team is vitally important. And it's about, quite honestly, getting the right person, the right individual to hand that baton to. I think the number one mistake that I've seen, and I know that you've seen as well, is founders make at this point, is they hire the Hollywood, what I call the Hollywood sales guy. The one is like, been to Wharton, got my like zip up. It's like, yeah, I know I'm connected.
I know everyone in the industry.
Everyone in it's like that, because you're enamored with that. You're like, oh, all right, Barry or Barbara, they've sold millions of dollars of deals. It's like, all right, I back them. I want them on my team. Off we go. And my humble opinion, that's a mistake, because what they've done is they've succeeded by being on top of a machine rather than building a go-to-market machine. And that's what you're going to need to do, because that's what you're passing the baton over to, is like somebody that can build the machine. And then you layer people on top of that, because that's how you get to the scale. So that's the number one mistake that I've certainly seen.
Oh, that's a great point, because I think a lot of people underestimate. They might be interviewing someone and look at their past sales history, which may or may not be true. It depends on what they tell you. But what you don't realize is the reason that this person sold millions of dollars in ARR for their last company is that there is a super sophisticated, super well-funded demand gen, lead qualification machine that's on top of it. And if you don't have that infrastructure and you just hire this big dollar salesperson, and your first question to them is, where's your millions of dollars? And their next question is, where's my leads?
Yeah.
Right. And there's a big disconnect often. So what else from like a business culture? So you're in the US, you grew up in the UK. What are things that, like, when you're trying to build business rapport, that you found missing early on?
Yeah, so the way I think about it is like I'm going to say a term, and everybody's going to go, "Oh, idiot!" But you've got to learn American. I think, and this is something that I was a little bit lazy towards, and I think the reason why is there's a false familiarization with between kind of UK and US cultures. Like we speak the same language, watch the same TV shows, movies, music, everything's become a lot more global. So there's this false familiarization with our cultures. And that really surprised me because I thought, all right, I'll go over there. I can hang and I know what I'm kind of doing. And what I was missing was the cultural cues. Okay. And it's as silly as NCAA basketball. What is that? What is the Final Four? Who's doing really well? Are you in a bracket? Fantasy football, who's doing really well? Who's in the playoffs this year? And I'm using sport as an example, but you've got to know the nuance of that, because the way that we do that in the UK is we talk about the weather. Okay, that is the common point of reference that gets everybody like, common.
Oh, cloudy and rainy again today.
It's better than hot and humid. But that's the common point of reference. Is like we'll all be aligned about the weather, and then it'll be like football. Like, did you see Man United lost again, etc., etc. But I was missing that. I was missing those social cues in America. So I had to go and do homework. I had to go and learn American. I had to learn, right, the first 5 minutes of any sales call is like, what are you going to talk about? That's really important. So I describe it as like learning American. And again, I think it took me 9 months to be comfortable in that sales environment to share nuances of that where it wasn't foreign.
And I know that Opal was headquartered in Portland for obvious reasons. I mean, your biggest customer, your brand was there. What was in hindsight, what are your thoughts about being based on the West Coast versus other parts of the U.S.? What was that experience like? Does it matter? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, Portland was great for us because as you say, my partners were there, but also that's where there was huge brands like Nike, Under Armour, Adidas. It was a hub of creative people, and we were in the marketing world, so it was a great place for us to be HQ as we're attracting talent, but also getting to brands. I mean, the things that I would say about choosing an American city to be in, and have a look at where your customers are. I think that's the number one kind of question. And then number two is like, where does your talent reside? I think those are probably the two kind of main criteria that I would kind of look at prior to choosing where we were. And also it's like, do you have UK operations that are going to continue to you maintain whilst you're also in the US? Because time zone can be crippling, but also think about operational overlap as well. So East Coast, you probably get 4 or 5 hours more if you're an early riser like David, but that reduces the further west you go. So if you're West Coast and you've got a UK, 5 o'clock in the evening is 9 o'clock in the morning West Coast. So who gives and what gives? And that is going to be a point of kind of friction, but also think about business continuity in that regard as well. How do you, because there's some element where it's like, hey, we're 18-hour, 24-hour, operation. But what about that kind of communication and cultural overlap that is so important?
At what point did you realize how much larger the U.S. is than the UK? Because just as an example, I'm here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. It's almost equal distant for me time-wise to fly to London as it would be to fly to Portland. Talk about those differences and how that impacts business in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was abundant very early for me. Just the opportunity. And that was kind of like, if you're taking innovation to market, it's like, whoa, all right, this is incredible, because what happens is then the network effect happens. Somebody sees something cool, they tell their peer about this, and that's what you want. That's product market fit.
Yeah, but if you got a new lead and you're in Portland from a brand in Atlanta, would you jump on a plane and go to Atlanta? I mean, how do you operate?
Well, I mean, I'd say it depends what kind of market you're in. If you're mid-market, probably not. If you're selling enterprise, yeah, the expectation is you're going to be face to face, because they're going to be $1 million deals. So, I think if the question is, right, what's important to choosing a city, accessibility is one. Being near a major airport is critical, especially if you're selling to the enterprise, because the expectation is not only do you sell as a human, like face to face, but also you service as a human face to face as well. And those expectations are there.
One of the things I find you really good at is talking about the human side of, because I'm very like business GTM finance focused, and you're always like, hey man, there's a whole other side of this thing that's super important for founders to understand. You've made mention of this before, like I didn't know what a social security number was when I came to the US. Or talk about your experience trying to get a driver's license, perhaps.
You just threw me under the bus, didn't you? Yeah, I mean, everything changes, right? Because you land in America, you're like, all right, cool, I got my driving license and my passport, and you don't really think about the elements that matter, that allow you to progress in just normal life. Like, you can't get a gym membership until you got a social security number. You can't get an apartment until you got a social security number. You can't get a bank account until you got an address. So it's kind of like, whoa, all right, there's probably some stuff I've got to figure out. And that was kind of, I think a little bit mind-boggling to me, because I'm like, I'm not a in the weeds, in the details person. I just kind of like go around and like map land and think everything's going to be okay. But you can only hold a international or foreign driving license for 90 days. So I didn't realize that. So, I think my 90 days had gone beyond, and I had to go and get a temporary one. And then I had to pass my test. And I was like a 30-something-year-old person. I'm like, retake my driving test. What are you talking about? I can drive. And they're like, no, sorry, you actually have to go through the process. So I failed my driving license 4 times. And can I just add, it's the written side of it that I failed 4 times, not the kind of practical, because you got to pass the written prior to getting to be accepted onto the practical. And you're in a booth and it's like, yes, no. And obviously I didn't do the homework. So yeah, it wasn't until my wife sat me down and was like, dude, what's going on here? That I kind of put some effort in.
Well, you told me a story at one point, kind of keeping on the human side, that, I think we've all done a bunch of startups. We know what that takes, kind of energy and focus wise. But you were telling me that when you and Laura first moved, that she didn't have a visa that allowed her to work.
Yeah.
And so you're doing all the really hard startup stuff all day, and then she's just waiting for you to come home. And when you come home, you're exhausted, and she's ready to talk. Talk about that a little bit.
No, I think, and you're right to bring it up. It's like, I'm really passionate about the human side, because I think what happens is, the VC's like, go get the TAM. There's an opportunity there, and the US is exciting. Yes, it is the land of opportunity. I fundamentally believe that, but the human side is the conversation that doesn't kind of rear its head enough. So I'm glad we're talking about it. And that is a challenge, where you go to the US, you're kind of like an entrepreneur. It's like, right, I've got to succeed. I've got my visa. 90% of the time, the likelihood is your partner will not get a work visa. That is correct. And I didn't understand that going in there, quite honestly. So 90% of the time, your partner cannot go there and work as well. So you're going to have to navigate that. So, all right, what do you do? Because I'm fulfilled doing my thing and driven by my thing and excited by my thing. How are you doing? and there's going to be this kind of imbalance, and that's certainly what I felt. And I felt great pressure as well, because I want, obviously, my partner to be happy, fulfilled, and, enjoying the journey and the chapter that we're on. And, we always had one rule. We had one rule where all my wife needed to do was say, I want to go home. And I would have gone on a plane and gone, look, this was great, but this is probably not for us as a couple, because I was never going to put kind of my relationship at risk, or my wife's unhappiness at risk. That was never part of the agenda. So that was the rule that we had. And luckily we never used that. She never kind of used that kind of angle. But that was, I really feel strongly that I wanted her to not feel trapped, and to have that out, if you like. So that was a key thing for us being in that, because you've got the kind of human side of it where she couldn't work. You got the human side of it where there's no friends. You got the human side of it where there's no family. And then you got the additional pressure of, all right, you just take in a chunk of money, you got to turn that into something, because then you've got investors and partners and the community, and everybody kind of weighing on you and expecting. And that's a lot of shit to take on. So, but
obviously it worked out. I mean, obviously worked out.
Yeah, but again, it's the human side of it. This is the stuff that's never talked about, because I think honestly, entrepreneurs are afraid to show that they've got chinks in their armor. Whereas, like, I got this. There's no holes here. But I think the human side of it needs to be a constant conversation in this. And for anybody looking to go to the US, it's like, it's okay to think about these things and just know what's coming up, because the more prepared anybody can get for that, mentally, physically, emotionally, with their kind of partners, the better it's going to be for them.
Now, a decade later and 2 kids later, you and Laura decided to move back to the UK. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it was very much a kind of personal reason for us, and it was just rooted in the fact that we wanted our kids growing up and educated in the UK system. It was very simple, and my eldest had just graduated kindergarten, so it was just the perfect time to make that break. And it was, we planned it probably 2 years in advance. It wasn't just a kind of, hey, we're up and leaving. It was planned. It was meticulous. It wasn't a kind of off the cuff decision. It was long and thought through. And I think it was only emphasized again by COVID, just how far we were away from friends and family, and et cetera, et cetera. And 10 years was a great ride. 10 years was an absolutely incredible journey. And, I never take a day of that for granted. I was very, very lucky, very, very lucky, and look back with extremely fond memories. And some of my best mates are still, in the US. My business partners are still in the US, and we're like brothers. It's kind of like there's a lot of greatness that I left behind, but also I knew it was a new chapter for me and the family.
If you could do it all over again, what would you do differently for the US expansion piece of this journey?
What would I do differently? I don't think I'd do anything different, because I believe that every misstep is a lesson, and we needed to learn what we needed to learn, and we had to go through it. So I wouldn't, from my journey, I wouldn't do anything differently.
Based on all those learnings, what advice would you give a founder who's looking at the US and expanding there for the first time and considering it? What would you tell them?
Go, book your flight. 3 words: book your flight.
Easy enough.
Easy, because I mean, context behind that, and I'm sure you're going to dig into it, is if you're on the fence, maybe it's not for you. Maybe it's not, and that's cool. That's fine. But adjust your TAM on your slide. But I'm joking. But maybe it's not for you, and that's absolutely fine, because it's going to be hard, it's going to be different, and it's going to be a challenge. But it is probably the most rewarding journey and chapter that you'll have.
I think that's really important, Matt. As we talk to companies, we'll talk to companies sometimes who want to like try it out. Is kind of the mindset, and I think in the U.S. market, I think it's really important to understand that half steps and partial motions simply do not work, because you'll be competing against people who are going 120%. Is that the case?
Yeah, that's certainly the case. And, we've seen it, and I've seen it, where if you're going to half-ass it, you're going to half-ass it. I believe in Yoda. It's like, do or do not. There is no try. It's like, and I joke about it, but it's like, book your ticket. What is the worst that could happen? You come home. That's fine. But book your ticket. Be in the game. Because it is the land of opportunity. And if you want to make money and you want to grow your business and you want to meet that TAM that's on your keynote, get out there. Get out there, and you can figure everything out. And guess what? Also, we're here to help you figure everything out as well. So just get out there.
Awesome. This is kind of the detail I don't think I've actually heard myself of your story. So this has been really great. We hope that you found everyone listening found Matt's story compelling and interesting, and hopefully insightful if you're considering your own. We're going to run a series with the podcast, talking to founders and VCs, again, trying to help founders who are contemplating moving their operations or expanding the U.S. market, just to better understand the process and the pitfalls and the best practices. So I hope you'll check back in and join us in our own journey on the podcast. Matt, any final parting words?
No, I think I don't want the negative to outweigh the positive, and I just want to reiterate that I truly believe, and I know you do, David, that the US is the land of opportunity, and there is no blockers. They can be removed. So I think it's just positive kind of elements of this can be overcome, and we got you back to that.
Great. Well, thanks for being guest number one. Look forward to having you as my co-host on all future episodes. And thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys. Bye.